Okay, hello everyone. I had a lovely chat in my breakout group with Gray and Winnie and Alice. So really nice to hear about people's backgrounds and their reasons for coming today. I'm going to give my research story. I'll keep it brief so that we have plenty of time for questions. And please do stop me as I'm going along as well. So I mentioned that my journey had not been very linear in terms of my disciplines and the various subject hats that I've worn along the way. So to go back to the beginning, my degree is from Trinity College Dublin. I studied philosophy and English. And I then went to Queen's University Belfast to do a master's in English. And I then went to the University of Nottingham. So at the time, Nottingham had a really bad reputation for gun crime, and I think it still has a reputation. My friend, remember her kind of just teasing me that I kept seeking out cities of conflict to do postgraduate work in. So from Dublin to Belfast to Nottingham. But so my degree was philosophy and English. My master's was English, and my PhD at Nottingham was actually in the Department of American Studies. I was looking at the modernist poet Wallace Stevens and his philosophical themes in his work, and two contemporary American philosophers, Richard Rorty and Stanley Cavell, who both had deep interests in literature. So it was very much a philosophy and literature PhD. I completed that in 2009. I then went to the University of Edinburgh for a year, where I worked as a secretary, bizarrely, in the philosophy department. But I actually made some really nice connections and met some really good people. And I became aware during my time in Edinburgh that the University of Edinburgh has the wonderful IASH, the Institute for Advanced Studies in the Humanities. And they have, or had, I think they still do, I think they're wonderful still actually. They have a number of postdoctoral and early career opportunities. So that would be my top tip, to check out IASH at the University of Edinburgh. I was fortunate to secure a 10-month postdoc there. And I sometimes think of this as my baby postdoc. I have the idea sometimes that in order to get kind of an established strong postdoc, it almost helps to have a little baby postdoc first. So that might be a 3-month position, a 6-month, a 10-month. And it can almost set you up for a bigger position and a more longer term scenario. So having finished my 10-month position at IASH, I then went back to Dublin in 2011. I was fortunate to get a 2-year Irish Research Council postdoctoral fellowship in the School of Philosophy at University College Dublin. So this would be my second tip for everyone, to look up the Irish Research Council postdoctoral fellowships. They are 1 or 2 or 3 years in length, depending on your project. They're open to international PhD graduates. So I know with the IASH postdoc that I had, you needed to have at least one of your original degrees from the UK. And because I had been to Queen's and to Nottingham, I was eligible to apply. But with the Irish Research Council, you don't have to have any of your degrees from Ireland. You can apply internationally. And that was a wonderful position. It was very protected in terms of my research. There's no teaching attachment or anything. I had 2 complete years to work. And what I did actually was to write my first monograph, to write my book. So I wrote a book, Ditching Wallace Stevens the Poet. I wrote a straightforward comparative study of Richard Rorty and Stanley Cavell, which probably should have been the PhD in the first place. And I think a lot of people have that experience where they write their PhD and then they realize, the project should have been this, and that's what they write their book on. So I was very lucky. I had a really good group of postdocs there working with me and got a lot of experience in terms of applying for research funding. And then towards the very end of my Irish Research Council 2-year postdoc, I applied for a Fulbright fellowship and was very lucky to secure that. And I had a position in the Department of Philosophy at the New School for Social Research in New York, which was wonderful and life affirming and like nothing I had experienced before. I had very much been between Ireland and the UK for all of those years. So it was really great to broaden my horizons and go to New York for a few months. I landed back then in Dublin in January 2014. And I always think of the next 18 months of my life as being kind of a challenging time. It felt very much at this point like the postdoc gravy train that I had been riding on just suddenly dried up. So I'd had a little bit of success. I'd had the IASH position, I'd had the IRC position, I'd had the Fulbright position. Here I was now 4 years after the PhD, and I had nothing. And I didn't really know what to do with myself and was starting to feel very disheartened. So what I did was I just took on a lot of teaching in Ireland. I took on adjunct lecturing at UCD, School of Philosophy and School of Education, at Marino Institute of Education, which is one of our teacher training colleges, and UCC, the University College Cork. So I was traveling up and down between Cork and Dublin. I was teaching in 4 different departments, all new modules. I don't know how I survived it, but anyway, I got through it. And then I was very, very lucky that a 12-month position in philosophy of education came up in UCD School of Education. At the time, I wasn't familiar with the School of Education at all. But obviously, you know, I knew UCD very well. I wasn't a teacher, so I did struggle a little bit to translate what I had been doing in philosophy departments to an education department. But I guess I was lucky. I mean, I didn't have educational research experience, but I knew the context very well. Obviously, I had been to school in Ireland. A lot of my family are teachers, so I knew the lingo, and I felt pretty comfortable. So that 12-month position became a permanent job in 2016, and I've been there ever since. So not a linear research story at all. Lots of bumps along the way. And happy to talk to anyone and to take any of your questions at this point. Thank you.
Okay, so where will I start? Well, I did my background, as Ayen just referred to hers. I studied pedagogy, which is not a title all over, especially in the UK, although now you are having this thing on educational sciences. And usually educational theory and philosophy of education in the Spanish academic context happens in faculties of education, not in faculties of philosophy. This varies, I think, from some context to others. So in a way, I think that's a good thing for us, because philosophy degrees tend to have less students than education degrees, and that comes with less or more teaching positions. So I think that's a strength of the Spanish context, if you compare maybe with others where philosophy of education only happens sometimes in faculties of philosophy or humanities, where programs all over the world are struggling to make the numbers and to fill their classes, whereas education, we actually have, at least in Spain, we have the other problem. So we have more students than that we can afford to teach. So I did the typical, I would say, in a way, very typical Spanish academic career, which is very straightforward. If you don't follow the straightforward way, things get much complicated. So the whole system is planned for, very good students. I did in my years, it was a 5-year full-time program, our BA on pedagogy. So you do that, you get excellent grades, you get awards because of your grades, and then you are put into this, track of applying for PhD grants. So I applied to several grants. I got like the best one in the Spanish context, which is like the national one. So there are every year, I would say, depends from budgets, but it's, I would say, for all research fields, maybe 90 or something like that, positions every year. So I got one in education. I did my PhD. And through this grant, this FPU, it's called, it's a very old program. It allowed me, and that was a very important thing, to spend rather long research stays abroad. So I spent 6 months in London at the old Institute of Education before joining UCL. That was a very, very important, I would say, educational experience, because I met people that I keep seeing today. So I really took advantage of that. And I think it is very important to have the opportunity to see how people work in other places and how academic life can be different. I would say coming from a rather traditional in a bad sense, with all the bad traditional things that come sometimes with academia in Latin context. So things are very hierarchical, discussions tend to be very personal. So there's not, sometimes there is not real conversations in public, because everybody needs to be polite, and if you get a bad comments, it's because they hate your supervisor or things like that, which have nothing to do with your work and things like that. And this is not the case. My experience was like, the UK was different. So I got this, it has its own problems, but in terms of having open discussions and not, taking it personally, that was for me a very, very relevant experience. Then I returned. Then I went back again to the US. I spent there at Penn State University with Vincent Colapietro. I spent there like 5 months, and I finished my PhD there. So I got a lot of my PhD work done during my research stays. Because in a way, the Spanish academic path is rather demanding. That's why you need to start young and fresh, because it takes a lot of energy, basically. So Maria Castillo, who's here, she's in that track, so she's smiling. She knows what I'm talking about. So you need to do your PhD, but at the same time, you're doing your 4-year scholarship, but then you need to get a lot of work done, like in terms of publications, conferences, and all that, because in order to secure positions or be able to apply for positions, you need to submit your academic record to National Agency of Quality Assurance. So this is a European EU thing. UK, you have never been there, I think, in this particular thing, and now you're not there, but maybe other colleagues in the continent, this thing may be familiar. So you submit your whole academic life there. It's very bureaucratic. So in a way, everything is a lie. Everything you put in the system is a lie unless you demonstrate the opposite. So you need to prove it's not just writing down all the things you've done. You need to present a proof, a document that says, I was in Copenhagen, I don't know which day, giving this paper. So it's a lot of work in terms of bureaucracy. So then you get this reply, and then you can apply for positions. If it is a positive, you get the opportunity to apply for positions in Spain for teaching positions in public universities, which is the position I got in 2015, but I got my PhD in 2013. So, and we were in the midst of the consequences of the economic crisis back then. So everything stopped. So no, retirements not being covered, no positions in public, in state-funded universities. So what I did during 2 years was teaching a lot in a private university. I struggled a lot there because it was like very horrible in many ways to me. Now I remember it like as a sort of military service, and now I only have like funny jokes about things that happened to me there, and I keep like souvenirs even now in my table as as a sort of reminder of these bad experiences that now I joke about, but I really had a hard time there. And in a way, it was hard because this university, I felt like I was living a movie, like my life wasn't my life, and I was like playing my role in a situation. It was a big university, part of a sort of international network of universities. So it was supposed to be a university, but it was actually like working for Coca-Cola, but just universities. So, lots of funny stories about that. Those years were very tough. So it was very tough during my PhD, getting my PhD done, doing all this work on the side, because then I need to have something else than my PhD to get, the certification to apply for positions. And in a way, I think I got lost there in terms of my research. I got things done, but it was more like whatever comes, I would say yes, because I need to, make my CV bigger. So I got plenty things done, that things I didn't really choose to do. I think, since in the end it was, it helped me in a way to get to secure the position. But it was hard then to get myself back in a way, right? So you get invitations to be part of empirical projects, for example, which I think it is a valuable experience as if you work in education, in faculties of education, to know what your colleagues in empirical research are doing and what we as a community actually we can bring into our research. They are maybe, I don't know, assessing a program, and you discover actually you can play a role there, and you can come in with interesting ideas and discuss the results and ask questions. And also it helped me to, as I like to say, speak in different research languages. So I think it is important, and I think it has helped me a lot to read in different languages, not just Spanish, French, English, but also in terms of different kinds of research, of pieces of research. I think that has been helpful in terms of being able to network, not just in terms of, international community of philosophers of education, but also with, colleagues of the faculty, and being able to collaborate in other projects, which has helped me to have experiences of other kinds. In terms of getting work done and meeting people, conferences, apart from these two big research stays, actually going to conferences has been very important in terms of advancing my own research agenda, I would say, and also meeting people, networking, starting collaborations with people, which has, I don't know, been my informal education and still is. I get invitations to do things I would have never imagined to do. I'm looking at Hans, for example. He invited me to be part of something that I've never really, in a way I was connected to. That's why Hans asked me to be part of it. But then it opened a new, lots of new ideas just through this invitation. So I've got lots of new ideas, just listening to my colleagues, reading things that I've never been, connected to if it wasn't because of them, because, I attended a seminar or I was invited to work on something, and there's this, a list of references, I don't know, in the call of papers, and then I get to read all these new things. So this has been very, very important. But also in terms of getting the work done, you were referring to that before, how to get, your stuff done when you are dealing with teaching, family. We are evading the question, that I think it is an important question. So how, because early career time also comes with our fertility window, especially women. Men, you have more time, but we don't. So it's something I think we can, especially if you need to start young and you still have to do your PhD and have a family. It's kind of difficult, right? So conferences in a way has been very important because they push you, right? You submit something, you commit, I want to submit something to this thing, and there is a deadline and it needs to be done and it needs to be submitted. And sometimes it's just a smaller abstract, but then you have to, maybe get accepted, and then you have to give a talk, and you get questions. So it's a lot of external pressure. To me, has worked a lot because, I'm not that, I don't know. I think I need this external help. So I found it through conferences, and I keep doing it. Even when my idea is not clear, I try to, do the abstracts, get it submitted, make it look good enough. Sometimes internally, and then you get, of course, if the reviewers are good, they will notice it, like, this needs a little bit more of work, but okay, let's give it a pass. depending on how advanced you are. And I think all my publications, they all started as something like this. You know, I got an invitation to give a talk, or I submit a small abstract maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and then the thing grows. You know, then I resubmit it, and then I sort of make it bigger, and then, but the genealogy, I think, of all my publication record, I mean, you can find it in conferences all the time. So it has helped me a lot. And I think that's a good, because you get like two things at once. So you get your own research, you know, you progress, and then you meet with people, you network, you can put up symposiums, and I mean, lots of nice things come up because of going to conferences, which initially are just non-material, you know, like feeling good, putting yourself there, trying out new ideas and all that. But then it materialized a lot, you know, in real friendships, in actually new ideas and publications, you know, at some point. So I truly recommend this. It is a lot of work. It is a lot of money. It is a lot of time consuming. In a way, I've been going on my own to many conferences. You go there, you don't know anybody. Now I go and I know everybody. But at the beginning, I didn't know anyone. And I'm not British, and my English was awful. And I thought myself to be super stupid because, you know, then I realized, well, I wasn't that stupid. I just didn't understand. So I don't know how many non-first English speakers are here, but that's something that I experienced a lot, feeling like super out of context, and then realizing, actually, I know 80% of the people in the room. And remembering when you went there as a young PhD student, you know, from Spain and knowing anyone, and then you end up, you know, being friends with many of them. So it's very rewarding in a way, but it is also demanding. And also here, I don't think any of you are in this situation, but of course, learning languages. That was something I was very determined to do. I was raised bilingual in French and Spanish, but my English wasn't just there. You know, I knew the English from high school, and that was it. And through the PhD, I really committed myself to, because I wanted to be part of the conversation. So I studied English, and then I have people who know me. I have this whole, these big vocabulary holes because I learned my English in academia. So I may have this, you know, I can follow a sophisticated conversation in philosophy education, but then I don't know how to say the parts of a car or things like that, you know, like daily English, daily life English is very awkward to me sometimes to speak. And
I don't think that's daily English. I don't know any.
Well, you know what I mean, like many, you know, typical, you know, things you learn in a formal instructional progress of English lessons that I didn't follow. So I really learned through academia. So I think that would be my recommendation. So in a way, I did it very much on my own. I didn't get like big postdoctoral positions. I just struggled with this private university situation where I work everything that came to me. And then the first year, I got the first position here where I still am at Universidad Autónoma de Madrid as an assistant. I think it took me like a year or two, as I told you, to find my way back, to, you know, take the control of your own career. So realizing like I need to take control. So I don't need to be, and I don't know if this is a gender thing, I'm not sure, but it happened to me. And I saw that happening to other female colleagues, like realizing you need to, you're not there waiting for people to ask you to do things or to, you know, to serve others. I'm very community oriented as well. So helping to do things for the research group. Here in Spain, we work a lot through research groups, research units within the departments. actually, take a more individual perspective on my own research as well, and focusing on the things I wanted to do instead of thinking on what we can do as a group. So that was a very, I think I had to do. And since I changed that, it was amazing. So I also recommend that. I would, because we tend to be, when you are part of a community and there's so many things to be done. I work in a department where we have many problems. So you can end up devoting your whole time to that. But you need to sort of find the balance, how to say no, it's very important, right? Making the decisions, your strategic decisions for the year. So I want to get this done. How can I get there? What paper I would like to submit here, what I would like, with whom I would like to work on, or what sort of commitments I'm already invested, how much I can get done. I'm not very good at that because I'm super optimistic with my own time, and sometimes I just get it wrong. But yes, this is things that have happened to me, and I think it is important to realize that actually this is a career, and that you need to decide what you want to work in. And I in particularly, I learn a lot how to do that looking at how my male colleagues do it. Seriously, because I mean, I was very unable to, be self-affirming in a way, and I learned just by, okay, so, and there's nothing wrong with that, and that's not being egoistic, and that's not being, rude. It's just establishing your priorities, and that's good.
Thanks so much, Bianca.
Thank you.
This I think of all speakers, my trajectory is the shortest. I just finished the PhD in 2019. After 2019 came the years with COVID, with not many opportunities for international exchange or collaboration. I also have to say, maybe as a bit as a disclaimer, but it's actually Anya and Bianca's testimonies reminded me of that I haven't done any care work, or I don't have a family to take care of during the PhD or after the PhD. So maybe that's also important to take into account when recounting my story. So I did my PhD at KU Leuven, and where I also studied. So I've done my bachelor's, my master's there. After my master's, during which I had done a research internship in Stockholm at Södertörn University, which was for me a bit like my first international experience. I could start the PhD position in Leuven. And what was very relevant for me there was the collaboration we had with the IOE. So we had like biannual colloquia where we presented work in a very encouraging small environment with colleagues we saw twice a year, and which was actually a very good environment to think about papers for conferences or to present for first drafts of ideas and so on, and also to get a feeling for what philosophy of education or educational theory looks like in other departments and at other universities. So together with such more small scale research collaborations, also winter schools or summer schools, I've also always found very helpful in presenting ideas, getting really in discussion with people working on other topics and other contexts or from different backgrounds, working with different theories, which I think is very helpful in building such an international profile, and that you become aware of discussions that take place within the field that are not limited to the kind of work that is being done at your own department. And I found it a very good preparation for also presenting my work at conferences. So in the first year of my PhD, I didn't go to conferences because I had the feeling I didn't have anything to present there. And then after that, I just went once a year, and at the end, I did, I think, 2 or 3 conferences in the last year. So conferences are expensive, are time consuming. It's often annoying to get there or to obtain funding, also from department chairs or external organizations. But I think the main point is it's not important to go every month to another conference or to do as many conferences as possible, but just to go regularly, like once a year, to get a feeling of what is being discussed in your field of interest. And several conferences have been, for me, very important. First of all, the ECR conference, the Educational Conference for Educational Research, where you have, I think, almost 30 different networks. So especially at the beginning of my PhD, when I was still finding my way in what kind of subdiscipline am I actually working in? Is this more philosophy oriented? Because I also touched upon aspects of politics and policy of education, or sociological theories. So especially for people who are a bit at the crossroads of different subdisciplines, it's, I think, a very good conference to dip into different networks and discussions and to explore different ways of doing educational research. I've become more and more familiar then with philosophy of education. So another conference I found very helpful is the INPE conference, the International Network of Philosophers of Education. That takes place every 2 years. And there you have philosophers of education from different backgrounds, contexts, working on different authors and theories who come together. It's a smaller conference, which I've found more productive for discussion or really to get to know people, whereas ECR was very helpful in getting some kind of an overview of what educational research is or what kind of different approaches there are in educational research. I found the INPE conference and actually also the PSGB conference, which is also still quite international, very helpful in getting more like a deep insight in philosophical discussions in education. And also, those were very helpful for me in getting to know people also like Bianca and Morten and Alison and others. So I think these elements were for me very important during the PhD. I had a lot of time to really work on my own project during my PhD, so I had only a little amount of teaching. I was just teaching assistant to my supervisor, so I didn't have my own classes to organize. That's maybe also important to say. And there was a requirement to publish during the PhD, but this was not as important as it was in Spain, for instance, when I hear Bianca speaking. And so we had to, it was expected that we publish one article at the end of the PhD, but also for future positions, it was not that important to have a set of 4 or 5 articles also on empirical topics or collaborative research projects. After the PhD, I was lucky that there was some money at the department to keep me on board for a few more months, which gave me the time to apply for other jobs. As I had been working in Leuven for almost 5 years by that time, and I had studied there before, I wanted to go abroad, and so I looked for interesting job opportunities abroad. And I had been, during the PhD, learning German, also because in the German context, you have a very broad discussion still in what I call general pedagogy or general education, allgemeine Erziehungswissenschaft, which is still very dominant or present in the idea of the fields of education studies. So learning German during my PhD also gave me some kind of an asset when applying for jobs in German-speaking countries. I applied for a job in Vienna with a supervisor that I didn't know at that time, but my own supervisors for my PhD made me aware of the job opening in Vienna. I did the job interview and I was hired. So I was very happy that I got the job there. I was also not hired for many other jobs, but that's maybe not as important. Or like it's also, of course, an important part of your experience of finding a job, not being hired. But I was very happy that I could start a job in Vienna. I've been very happy in Vienna, also as a city, as a department. So I think as well, when you look for international opportunities, it's important to bear in mind, like to balance that when you have a family, to the interest of your partner and kids, or to other family members, to take that into account where they would want to live, if they would be open to that opportunity, of course, and to look for nice departments, nice research centers where they do the kind of research that you're actually interested in. Of course, for me, an important step after the PhD was also to closing off that chapter of my career. So also to get acquainted with different theories, different methodologies. So the department I'm working in now is much more focused on history of education, and more particularly intellectual history, or history of educational ideas, which was a bit of a challenge because my background was more in like real philosophy of education, or like where you discuss educational matters from a strictly philosophical point of view, which maybe touches a bit on more political or contextual aspects, but not that strong historical focus that I work in now. But I've also found that very enriching, actually, to also broaden your perspective. I think this is quite similar to Bianca's experience when she talks about being involved in different research projects that require different skills or different ways of thinking than what you've been trained in during the PhD. It's also very enriching to get to be part of new discussions, to become acquainted with different languages of educational research, different ways of talking about research, different ways of doing research. So for me, that was really, really interesting and helpful. I was hired for a 4-year position, which is still quite common in the German-speaking context, although there are some reforms who want to shorten the time of, or like the contract duration, but the 4-year or even a 6-year postdoc position is not that rare, or is not that, is at the moment still not that rare, which really gives you the time to develop your PhD project into a book, and at the same time explore different theories, different research questions, and so on. So that's mainly what I did in the first year of my stay here. And after that, I started refining my new research projects and also tried to obtain external funds to get a contract prolongation. So that's maybe a distinction or something different in the British context. And I don't know for the Scandinavian context, but where it's more common to have these lectureship positions, which are already permanent positions from which you can apply for higher positions, or like that you can climb up the career ladder, which are often very heavy in teaching. In the German-speaking context, it's very common to have very strong research-oriented positions, which are limited in time. So no permanent positions, but when you have like a 4 or 6 year postdoc contract with some teaching, but it's very limited. So for myself, I have to teach 2 classes a semester. So that means 3 hours of teaching a week, which is not that much. There are no really requirements to what I teach or how I teach what I teach. So I have a lot of freedom to select texts that I want to discuss with students, to think about what kind of didactic strategies I want to employ in classes, to really also use stuff that I teach for my research. So it often happens that I start with a few weeks of text that I know to get the students into that discussion, and then at the end of the semester plan text that I haven't read yet myself, to also like to keep it interesting for myself, to explore new ideas with students, to really to get into a conversation about these issues with them. That's also something that I found very attractive in this system, and this freedom that you have in designing, in course design. What else then? Yeah, the next steps are not clear to me yet. Or like I have obtained a research grant for 3 more years from the Austrian National Research Council, which will also provide me with some travel money to further go to conferences and to do archival research in different sites. So it's actually because I had this luxury actually of having this 4-year contract that I, with a lot of time for research, that I also could really reorient myself in new discussions. At the same time, publish a bit on my PhD or in the margins of my PhD, and to explore new themes and topics. I think that's that would be it for now.
Alison, for organizing this. It's been great to hear the 3 stories from people that I know. It's been fun to hear it from in this way anyway. And listening to the stories, I'm sort of don't know if I'm the right candidate for this, because I think academically speaking, I'm quite young in academic years to be an associate professor, and my trajectory has been quite quick and extremely privileged, both as a consequence of being where I am in the Scandinavian context, where there is a history of a welfare system, and PhD positions are paid positions with a pension, maternity leave. I mean, there are all kinds of things here in the Scandinavian countries. We're slowly sort of dismantling everything. So I think for the younger people going into academia, the conditions will be a lot harder than they were for me, even though, I mean, I finished my PhD in 2017, so it's not that long ago, right? But things are moving quickly here. Then I began my academic trajectory at a quite advanced age, I think, compared to other people maybe. So in terms, that's the other reason why maybe I'm not best suited for this, is with international opportunities, is that I already had a child when I began my PhD, so I was very limited in my possibilities. So I basically couldn't do the 6 months somewhere or the year somewhere, because we were sort of settled here in Copenhagen. But maybe I'll return to why international opportunities are so important, particularly because I perhaps also have the starting point that if your ambition is just the sort of the academic career, then I think I would try to dissuade you from actually pursuing it, because academia is not that fun, just based on it being a career. But there are other things that are a draw, and I'll try to get to that. So I started so I'm not university trained. So I started training as what we call a pedagogue in Denmark in like 20 years ago. And I think it would be equivalent to like a youth worker, a social worker, or something like that. So I did my degree in that. I worked with young people in Wales, in Barcelona, in Denmark for a number of years. And because I was working with young people, it was in the afternoon. So I'd spend my morning sitting in cafes in Copenhagen reading Sartre, like you, Alison, and Foucault and other thinkers. And I'd go to staff meeting at the youth centers wanting to discuss existential and pedagogical questions with my colleagues, who wanted to discuss whether we should permit the young people to smoke in the sort of in the center, so if they had to go outside, and very practical sort of details. So I had to sort of bite the bullet, leave the working class position I was in, and go to uni, which I had sworn I wouldn't do. So I did a master's in philosophy of education, And when I was finishing, I felt I wasn't finished. I mean, I wasn't finished being a student. I wasn't finished reading, discussing, writing. So I thought, how do I then proceed if I want to continue doing this and not just go back to being a youth worker? So I thought then I'd perhaps do a PhD. And as is the case in most contexts, there are no PhDs in philosophy of education. So I had to sort of apply through some of the funding agencies, and there was this funding opportunity in the educational sciences, which usually goes to empirical projects. So I had to sort of write an application that said I would do some empirical work and said I would do something about something that was sort of popular in the moment. And my master's thesis was on Hannah Arendt. And so my mind was full of her. It's all I had in my head. But I'd worked with inclusion as a youth worker. And I thought, okay, inclusion is a buzzword. Everyone's talking about inclusion. So I'll write a proposal where I say that we can learn a lot about inclusion from Hannah Arendt, and then I'll do this empirical stuff on the side. And for some reason, I got the funding, which was very lucky. And then because there were no other philosophy of education PhD students, I quickly realized that I'd have to go out internationally to meet people working with similar things. So very quickly after beginning my PhD, I sent in an abstract, like Bianca, just send it off to try to go somewhere. So I went to the ECR conference, and that's where I met Bianca for the first time. So Bianca was in the same session as me, and I was very nervous. Sharon Todd was our chair, if I remember correctly, and both Sharon and Bianca were very nice to me, and have been ever since. So they helped me through my first conference presentation, which was nice. While I studied my master's thesis writing about Arendt and pedagogy, I came across the work of Jan Marschlein, and thinking that I would need to meet people from outside, with fear and trembling, I sent an email to Jan to ask if I could maybe come visit for a couple of weeks, no more, because I had to go home to my child and everything. So, and he was kind enough to reply that I was very, very welcome in Leuven. And I went there, and of course, Jan had no time for me at all because he's very busy. So he assigned his doctoral student, Hans, to take me to lunch and show me around. And Hans was also very, very nice to me. And so I've seen Hans on and off since then, and he's become part of the community, which is very, very nice. I also went as quickly as I could to the Oxford conference, the PSGB conference, because I'd heard that was the place where the local philosophers of education in Copenhagen, they never got accepted to that conference. And because they were very, they were not very accommodating in terms of sort of building a network and an environment and everything. There was a lone wolf characters. I thought, I'm going to send a paper to the Oxford conference and I'm going to show them. So I did. And I got accepted, which was fun. So I went to Oxford, and we were discussing this actually in the breakout room, what year it was. But then Rowena and I were in the same session. And of course, we share an interest in Hannah Arendt. So that's how I met Rowena, which was also very nice. And we've been in touch ever since, meeting at conferences and also in seminars and colloquias like this. I sort of, from that, started to build my international community, and starting to get that sense of actually being part of a conversation, which was really, really rewarding. And then a couple of years later, just after I'd finished my PhD, Pollock Hogan, who was the chair of the conference in Oxford, had this idea of creating a panel for the conference for the last day, and then invited me and a guy called Steve I was working with at the time to sit at that panel. So I had to sit in the Hollywell room, which was extremely scary to be sitting there and giving a talk in front of a lot of people, maybe even for I know some of the people in the room here. And after I'd given my talk, and as usual, I was talking mainly about, I was invited to talk about inclusion, but I talked mainly about Hannah Arendt and her separation of education and politics. And then when it became time for the questions, so Alison raised her hand and was very unhappy with my separation of education and politics. So she gave it to me in front of everyone in the Hollywell room. So that's, I think I met Alison once or twice before, but that's when I really got to know Alison, when she put me in my place in the Hollywell room. So the reason why I, instead of talking a lot about my own trajectory in this beginning, I wanted to open with talking about the community and the very people in this room who have become part of my sort of community in philosophy of education, in that all the applying, all the applications, and huge congratulations, Hans, on your grant. That's wonderful. You deserve it. You can sort of get bogged down. And coming back to what Hans was talking about, the differences between the Scandinavian system and the German system and the other kinds of systems, is that in the Scandinavian system, you quite, at least in the Swedish context where I ended up after my PhD, we quite quickly move into these teaching heavy but permanent positions. And then you apply to become a senior lecturer, and then you apply to become an associate professor and so on. And you have, every time you do that, you have to write this application. And then you compile these lists of like achievements that you've done. And every time I've done that, I felt so disillusioned with academic work, because it feels like you're just chasing one thing after another, and it becomes very instrumental. And I think it's quite easy to get stuck in that. And when I get stuck in that and feel like, what's the reason even to continue? Because we all know it's not going to end, that process. You can become an assistant professor, you can become an associate professor, you can become a full professor. You still have to work in this way with applying for funding and getting grants and opportunities and everything. So that doesn't stop. But what makes it, if you look at those sort of CVs and you look at those applications and very instrumental descriptions of how wonderful you are, in a sense, but if you start looking for the names, instead of looking at like grants and awards and everything, you look for the names, and then you begin to see that community building. And you see it expanding as well over the years, how some people return, or some people come in, and some people are there all throughout the trajectory. That actually makes it quite nice to look at those documents, which otherwise is not a very nice experience. So so I think in terms of international opportunities, you can think of it in very instrumental terms, but you can also think it in those terms as a kind of building a community and making yourself a part of a conversation. And I think that's would be my extremely privileged, and I acknowledge that, advice or position would be to say that always when you're in this process of trying to find your path, try to think of it in terms of that as well, building a community and being part of a conversation. I certainly would encourage that. But that was what I wanted to say.